with Rabbi Zwiebel's article. I'm just explaining what I wrote and standing by it rather than trying to add new flame onto the fire. That's all, yeah.
So what did you write this week to respond? Was that the content that you wrote?
Well, yes, I wrote two things this week. First of all, the first half of what I wrote was to provide this context, explain the details. Just to set the record straight so people should understand the facts. The second half, I wrote really apologizing because Rabbi Zwiebel raised the point that there was a little implication in my first article that maybe, as if to say that Rabbi Scherer was pocketing money.
Right.
And I was shocked that he saw that, because it had never occurred to me. But I asked some of my family members, can you read this language? And do you think it could be read that way? Did I step in it by using a type of language that could be interpreted that way? And it was like my family voted about 50-50, so I saw that reasonable people could interpret it that way. And Chas v'Shalom, I didn't want that to be out there. So the second half of my article is to say that I was never any kavanah in my mind, beremes or b'drus or b'pshat, or besides imply Rabbi Scherer pocketed a dime, or never took a kickback, or benefit, or ever got more than a regular salary. And my point was that there's a basic debate here: should aguda Yisrael be devoted to fundraising as its prime purpose, or frankly, even as any part of its purpose? Fundraising for the yeshivas, I mean. But that our belief, I think Rabbi Miller was the rabbi in this area, and I wanted to tell me them in this area. And there's a lot of chaverim, as you know, that believe very strongly that Agudas Yisrael is a holy organization that's supposed to represent Das Torah and Gedalia Torah, and therefore should devote itself to anything but money. Money, that's the second debate, whether we should be asking the government for money. And we can have a discussion on that in another conversation, because I personally am against that also. But I'm saying even Louis Tzuya, that you should take money from the government, that should be in a separate organization that has nothing to do with Agudas Yisrael.
Okay, so
It should only be about shining the light of Torah and truth in the world. That's what they came together to go for. That's what should be the high and idealistic purpose of Agudas Yisrael, and we all Kiddush Hashem. And nobody could ever be choshed that maybe you're doing it to make a few dollars.
Now, Rabbi Homnik, you can say Eidus. Here I am. I'm only blowing my shofar because it's Elul. You can say Eidus that I've been mevatel a fair amount of your Torah, but while doing it, at least I was regaling you that I've told you some fascinating autobiographical stories that I've had. And the reason I've had these interesting stories and episodes is basically, as I've said, because I'm an automaton, a shlucha drabanan in the language of the late great Kashav Rabbi Raphael Bloom, and Rabbi Victor Miller, who said, Kol dibur of dibarti moizez man rav. He said this and wrote this in the letter to Rav Yisrael. This letter is published. It's small, but it's in the authentic, authorized biography of the life and times of Rabbi Victor Miller, written by a primary student, Rabbi Hamburger. And in that context, he writes Rav Yisrael superlative things about his protege Yehuda Levin, who was then 29 years old, 30 years old, and he writes Kol dibur of dibarti moizez man rav. So I want to now tell you a Maisa. That had to do with Rav Avram Chaim Levin, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. When Aguda was not doing their job on the moral issues, and it could be, I don't recall what particular avla they did, and I use the word avla advisedly, and they've done many of them, which I can document because I was involved in the maelstrom right in the middle of the thing. So I got very upset. It could be when they honored Joe Lieberman. They honored Joe Lieberman. This was exactly 1 year, almost to the day, but it was 1 year of dinner to dinner. If you recall, The very day of the Aguda dinner on a Sunday, that's when Rabbi Sher was nifta, and on Monday was his levaya. Rabbi Menachem Porish flew in, and etc. etc. It was a massive levaya on 14th Avenue in Borough Park. The day before that, Al Gore was to be the guest speaker, and they taught him to say, which was nothing wrong with that, to say a hesped of Rabbi Sher on Sunday. When he was waiting, he was still waiting for the levaya. That was 1 year, almost to the day, after they chose to honor Joe. I'm Orthodox, but I'm not Orthodox. I cut out from the Siddur, Shalei Asani Isha, that's what he told Imus. I support partial birth abortion. I was the one who, in the front page of the New York Times, was responsible for insinuating openly gay acts in the military. And I wrote a book about Shmira Shabbos for the OU. It's all one nice kettle of wax. And that's why we all trust the OU's Hechsherim, because they have such great hashkafas. Like giving a Hechsher gay ice cream. Literally, gay ice cream. That was what it was called. So now, to get back to the story, when I saw they were honoring Joe the Oisworf Lieberman, so I took a handful of people, including the late, great Dr. Howard Horowitz, maybe a priest or two, my own children who were then pre-bar mitzvah, and we printed up a few hundred letters. I only had a little money, much. So I could only print a few hundred letters. There were Moshe Feinstein that I got his letter signed, that you have to fight against the Mishkav Zohar agenda, and you have to go down to City Hall. It's a mitzvah shabukufay. L'maloi sesaulam kol yemei hearings laharis goli she'am so'eva l'cholo amim she'am Hashem so'ne teyeva. Very strong lashon, and that was after Mordechai Tendler probably watered it down with the Jacobs brothers. That was afterwards.
Let's not assume that if
I am assuming. I'll tell you why I'm assuming. Because
no, let's not assume that. Let's assume that a letter from a Moshe is a letter from a Moshe.
Oh well, no, it is a letter.
No.
No. Listen. Here's the deal. How did I get that letter from Moshe? Did I walk into a Moshe Feinstein and say, here, I'm Yehuda Nudnik. I'm all of Chveis at that time in 83. I'm all of 28 years old. Give a letter, Azal letter? No. What I did was I went to the Debrecen Rav, I went to the Linzer Rav, and I went to Rav Avigdor Miller. And I and Yebod L'chaim Aruchim Rabbi Yeshua Lyman, who was a wordsmith extraordinaire, and Yebod L'chaim, my friend and quasi-Rebbe, when I began in this thing, Rav Hillel Handler, who was a decade older than me, and I and they drafted an in-depth letter to Rav Moshe that covered all the kinds of potentialities, eventualities of what's happening, voting, being machabed, supporting, giving thing. So when I tell you, watered down, all these things that I had to go through, Rabbi Mordechai Tendler, were ignored, and therefore I will repeat to you, Rabbi Homnik, it was flipping very watered down. That's it. And they had the letter for months. It was Sukkot time, and I didn't get it until Adar, and only because they literally had started doing what they were doing. Now, I took this letter that I had obtained, and years later, when they honored Lieberman, I took this letter, and we stood outside the Marriott or whatever hotel, it was the Sheraton, I think, a handful of people, including my kids. I was mechanech my kids. You have to protest, and I gave my kids the letters, and as each person walked in, I had on one side an open letter to the Aguda. Who are you honoring? This is his record. Here's the letter for Rabbi Moshe. And I remember Chaim Epstein walked in together with the Matistarfa. I handed them both the letter, or I sent my son over, and they both read the letter and walked in. Now, the 2 nights before that, Haroitza Lishaka Yarchik Edusai, so I'm saying names, Shlomo Winter, Zocher Latoiv, a Philly Talmud, called up at my behest, called up Rav Eliasvei, and he said to Rav Eliasvei, do you know the voting record of Joe Lieberman, who they're honoring with a humanitarian award, this Oisvarv? Partial birth abortion with Mishkav Zocher, mit alle Geschmack Sachen.
By the way, can I interrupt you just
Sure.
a minute to magnify it a little, amplify it?
Sure.
Because I'm no fan of Joe Lieberman. So it's not just that he voted for the partial birth abortion, I'm sorry. It's that he voted to override.
He voted
he voted to not override the
Right. In other words, he was one of.
Which there was 64 votes.
Right.
To override.
Right.
And he was one of the 36 not to override.
Okay, so now.
That's not just one could possibly.
No, thank you.
That's like when serious
no, thank you, Mamish. Thank you for reminding me, and I have to burst into spontaneous song. There was a Goyish group. I can't remember the name. So now I'll give people an excuse to throw rocks at me. I used to hear a certain amount of Goyish music, and I used and there's a famous song. It might have been taken from Koheles or something. The song goes like this. Dust in the wind, all we are is dust in the wind. And I sing covered what you reminded me, which I remember now, and I'm going to be masbid. I sing like this. Lieberman, blood on your hand. So much blood on your hands while you're writing a book about Shabbos for the OU. Blood on your hands. You understand? Nobody says these things. I don't give a darn. Now, here's the deal.
At that time,
no, I just was machadish this now. No, but the point is like this. No, here, listen, Ziskite. The point is like this. Let me bring it home. Let me drive your point home. Joe Lieberman was looked at as the ortho Jew, the conscience of the Senate. When this Oisvov voted for the barbarism, in effect, not to prevent partial birth abortion, he gave cover to a lot of other lowlifes who, if he would have done the right thing, chances are.
It's one of the great betrayals of all time.
Okay. And
I'll tell you something, that his mother davened in Muncie in the shul. They used to live in New Haven when he was younger.
Right.
In her old age, she was in Muncie, and she davened in the shul, and she came in after that, to Shabbos, after that vote. The other one was mama's, today, there was a lot of hostility in the air. It was shock. And she turned to the lady, this I was told by somebody who was there. She turned to the lady next to her and said, you understand they did it for Shalom Bayis. So she blamed it on the wife. She's
blaming it on Gordon Tucker's Rebbitzin, the conservative rabbi that the Zivik Sheni Hadassah was Gordon Tucker, I believe.
Right, she blamed it on the wife. But the truth is that, if you can't stand up to your wife on a matter of life and death like this.
Listen. You should know, I don't mean to be flippant, but if we take this asininity to its logical extreme, and people are going to get offended by say this, but I'm born to offend. Some people were born free. I'm born to offend. So let me say this. Goring wanted Shalom Bayis, so he made the Nuremberg laws. You understand? This is Ritzicha. Ritzicha. This is flipping Ritzicha. And it's a kitchen.
That was a terrible moment in the history of from years in America.
Now I want to drive home the hashkafa.
Notably the from years.
I want to drive home the hashkafa.
I really appreciate it, people. That's why I'm amplifying it for you. But
I appreciate it. I want to be. We're going far afield, but we'll come back to go, and we'll collect 200 before the end of this monopoly. I'm monopolizing. The point is like this. Right now, there's an article on the internet. The article is written by Matt Margulis. For all I know, if you go back to Matt Margulis, I have a feeling he wasn't born in Kenya. And we don't have to check his birth certificate. His name is Matt Margulis, and he's a conservative. Are you with me?
Yeah.
He wrote an article, current now, about Scott Wiener, I think his name is. Scott Wiener is an open LGBTQRST maneuver in the legislature of California.
Yeah, terrible little order there, man.
Scott introduced a bill that passed now both houses, and it's waiting for Governor Gavin San Francisco Newsom to sign. Yeah, now, if a person is a 23-year-old pedophile or a 21-year-old pedophile, and he has a quote-unquote consensual relationship in sodomy to a 14-year-old within 10 years, or if he's 19 and he does it with a 9-year-old, he shouldn't be listed on a pedophile list and this and that, and he has a whole cheshbonis that it's anti-gay LGBTQR. Now, what do you see on a deeper level? What do you see here, Rabbi Say? Wake up and know why you're coming here to sit at the feet of Rabbi Yaakov Homnik and his janitor Yehuda Levin to learn hashkafa. What does that mean? Everything is around the Jews. The culture, the religio culture kampf is personified by Jew boy versus Jew boy. Look what this Jew did to me, like it said in Megillah. Look what Shaul did for me, and look what his grandson, look what Mordechai and Esther did for me. In other words, the Zu Umazu. Look what, not to compare Shaul Chas v'Shalom, but the pshat is we understood it's surrounding what the Jews do. Scott Wiener, the personification of Ali Schmutz, Jew boy, being metamtem and metame the entire country. So now, when you have this Joe Lieberman, this is exactly the same thing. We look to the Jew, and it's Nasa Keheta, and in the Bezin Shalmala, that's what the Rebbeinu Shalom is screaming about. So now,
I want to tell you a story that you maybe don't even know yourself.
Go ahead.
Even though it was in the New York Times at the time. This from here. You don't need to ask my inside information. I read it as an adult. I almost never read the New York Times because it's such a built on Sheka. But it was the day after Pesach of that year, and I went out to get chametz. Anyway, so
you went out to get some leaven.
Yeah, I went out to get some leaven, and,
yeah.
And I don't know how the Avish guided me a lot. Or maybe I shouldn't blame it on the Avish, but I bought a New York Times from a machine, and I was living in Cincinnati, and there was an article there, and maybe I saw the article on the front page. That's why I bought it. I don't remember that exactly, but there was an article that when Clinton did the veto, remember they had already passed both houses of Congress, outlawing partial birth abortion.
Right.
And he did a veto. And then that was later when Lieberman supported the veto.
Exactly.
But the point is, there was an article that when a lot of times when they do a veto, they'll do a ceremony for the veto. And they'll explain why they're doing it, and they'll bring some maybe people along. So he did the veto. It was Achon Shel Pesach of that year.
Oh my goodness!
And so that's why we weren't following the news. We were in shul.
I hear.
And Clinton knew that trick. He did the same thing with Elian Gonzalez, who was lawyer with the front guy, Spencer Hike. So he went on Pesach to take the kid. So Clinton knew when it was Pesach, and he did all kinds of risks based on that. So what did he do? He did the veto on Pesach.
Vayihid b'chatzi alayla.
And he brought a woman from Los Angeles, a Jewish woman, and she got up there and said that she did a partial birth abortion on Yom Kippur.
Yeah, I hear.
And and that was supposed to be a riot. We were supposed to do that. It must have been Gavaldik Chama. If she would do it on Yom Kippur, it shows you how what a high tzidkus it was to do the partial birth abortion. So, I mean, she didn't say that the doctor said you needed the partial birth abortion. She said the doctor said you needed the abortion. And so she did it on Yom Kippur. But somehow she did the partial birth abortion on Yom Kippur. And Clinton, of course, put his arm around her naturally. And he never missed an opportunity to do that. And he said, we need people like this in America, more people like this, good people. So
and Clinton,
I don't know how I survived, how my heart kept beating through that moment, because I was such zichud, not enough that the Rishoyim Arudim are killing the Rabbi Shalom's preachers, the Talmud of the Musar. That's not enough. But you have to take a hit who was like Baal Naam or Rasa B'Yom Kippurim,
Right.
That's the raya, because this year did it on Yom Kippur, Samela Sputna, and that's it. We're going to all do it. Hefka kill millions of people. Unbelievable.
Now,
And so the next Shabbos, this is a true story. I was living in Cincinnati, and the next Shabbos, I decided I have to speak. And I got up about this thing, and I got up to speak, and I said about 3 words, and my throat locked up. I was in such sound that I was not able to articulate a word, and I had to sit down. I tried. I could not get
Right.
The fact is, literally, I
So-
never had that experience before. After
So
my
I'm gonna jump.
I was blocked. I could not speak.
I'm gonna jump very quickly into a half a second of Torah, and then get back. I still didn't complete this first story. The half a minute of Torah is like this: you went from the oilam of chita hadibor to something that preceded chita hadibor, which is pure coil, so to speak. In other words, you weren't able. It was Adam Behema to Shir Hashem. You were like Goineach Kamay Behema. The most you could do is probably Krechts. Now, the longest of that might be connected with a Chasam Sofer on the Indian of Shofar. That Chasam Sofer is Masber. That we're going back. If you look in the Machzorim, the old Machzorim, they have a Zoyer that seems to say there was a primordial world that was called Shofar, just like there was a primordial world by Purim called Shekel. And when you access these things, that's why the shekel is in shofris, because they connect. That's my word. So here the Chasam Sofer says that what we're doing with shofar, lishmoya kol shofar, is we're being gaineach like behemoths, and we're saying to Hashem, you make the chita chadibur, because we cannot make the chita chadibur. We're in such a mavulcha that we can't do it. So you experienced a little bit of that. Bemis, I'm not kidding. You experienced a little bit of that. And that's really merumas in the tefillah that we say 3 times a day, Shema koilenu, the Kabbalah Barach Ratzon Tefillah Seinu. We hope to get to a madrega of koil. And that's why sometimes in davening, if you're in Shemon Esrei, if you're davening a certain shtickle and you get into it, like Yishalayim Yircha, besides the word, you switch into a niggin. You switch into a niggin, that's a bechin of koil, and you're getting even to a primordial, to a very high space. But let me get back to this story, Rabbi Homnik. So I took these letters that I had given out to various Gedolei Yisrael, etc., and to all the people, hundreds of people who walked into that good thing. So I'm sure Rav Sherer was plotting, and he walked over to my friend Michael Barbaro, who had insinuated himself in there, and he walked over to him in that stentorian, is that the right word, stentorian, or is it stenorian? I think it's stentorian voice, and he said, it was a beautiful voice Rabbi Sherer had. He was a captivating, powerful speaker, and he was like, nobody's choice should have been taking a penny. Of course not, it's ridiculous. The pennies that he took and the dollars and everything else, our problem is that he took it for yeshivas, but I'm saying it, you're not saying it, I make the delineation, but it's Estan Zoynegelt. You don't build yeshivas on turning the other cheek to immorality. It doesn't help Vax Gedolei Yisrael. But anyhow, and that was the problem with the Aaron Sheriff, Rabbi Sheriff philosophy, as I've been pointing out for several years now. Now, the point is, he walked over to Barbaro and he said, Mr. Barbaro, I hope you're not planning on interrupting and shouting or anything, like that. Barbara reported back to me. Now, here's the deal. I took this letter from Moshe with the other letters, and I sent it out to 20 or 30 people from the Vayetzes Gedolei Torah, etc. Then I called up the Rosh Yeshiva of Long Beach, and I said to him, my name's Yehuda Levin. Did the Rosh Yeshiva receive my letter? He said, yes. And he said to me, so what do you suggest that we do? So first of all, I was very flattered, and I was somewhat taken aback, because we know Aguda does everything. Aguda knows, and they're all knowing, and this and that, etc. And it's mamish like, you're going b'fnai with the Kohen's breastplate and everything else. And how come the Rosh Yeshiva of the Meretz Gedolei Torah is asking, Rabbi Fegelstock is asking little old fat ball Yehuda Levin what we should do about all the immoral politicians that Aguda is supporting. So I said to him like this, I have a suggestion. Klal Yisrael has come of age, and therefore you should make a second organization. Call that second organization Shomrei Kedusha V'Tahara. Let Aguda be the fundraisers, the this, the that, etc., but let them be another entity of Gedolei Yisrael that's uncompromising on morality, which is basically what Moshe Rav Yankov and everybody else was teaching us, which was a pashut, which the beer-swilling, blue-collar, Irish Catholic bar attending after working as a bus driver understood when he was talking to his Scottish friend in the bar in 1956. He understood it, what we don't understand already for the last 40 years post-Stonewall. That's it. So what did Rabbi Fegelstock answer me? Rabbi Fegelstock is, no, I'm not saying this chas v'shalom, I'm saying facts. He is known as a big pikeach, a big bal eitz and everything else. This is what he asked Yehuda Levin. You know why he asked me? He whispered to himself, sotto voce, Nitna levua l'shaitim. Let me ask this shaita, because we no longer have the breastplate in the Kohen Gadol. Okay, so I'm the shaita. So I told him, So then he tells me, go discuss it with Rav Avram Chaim Levin. All right? I did not discuss it with Rav Avram Chaim Levin because I realized that I'm not playing ping pong Me'etzes Gedolei Torah. I told you, you're the Achroi. I don't have to discuss it with anything. It's a no-brainer. Make the two organizations. Give us a little cover and finish. Senator Danforth told his people in 1994 or thereabouts to call Yehuda Levin. Where's Yehuda Levin? I garnished some fuzzball in Brooklyn. Getting on the phone with me. I remember Ted Blue, and they say, we don't understand it, Rabbi. Your Joe Liebman is an Orthodox Jew, and there's now partial birth abortion. It was, I think, in 94 that it came out. And your Joe Liebman is busy with partial birth abortion. Could you tell us how do Orthodox Jews look at this thing? Achenvei. And if Aguda wants to represent it, they're for this and for that and the other thing, etc., etc. So now we have a story. The story is like this. Shlomo Winter called up 2 nights before, and he says to his Rebbe, Rev Yisvei, we learned that Agudas Yisrael, they'll tell us this claptrap, this lie, this sheker, that everything they consult, and therefore you could be sure if it's happening, it was under the tutelage and the guidance and the advice and the insight and 15 other adjectives of Me'etzes Gedolei Torah. So Rev Svei, did you know Joe Liebman's voting record? And Rev Svei went ballistic. Now, if I wanted to lie, I wouldn't give the name Shlomo Winter that I sent to speak to him. He started to scream and yell on the phone. He was a person who got a little hot under the collar. They never told me. They never asked me. It's wrong. Blah, 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 blah. Fast forward, a few months later, Shlomo Winter goes into the Aguda of Avenue L, and unfortunately the Rav, Atayar Yoker, whose name I forget, a tzaddik, who was a son-in-law of the late great Mashgiach, Rev Kornglass of Baltimore. He was what?
Baltimore, yeah.
Yes, and the young rabbi was Nifter, I forget his name, the Aguda of Avenue L. And Shlomo Winter walked over, and he gets very emotional. And he pointed his finger at Rabbi Shera, and he said to Rabbi Shera, "How could you make a Chilul Hashem honoring a person like Joe Liebman?" So Rabbi Shera said to him in that same golden voice, "Put down your finger. Who are you pointing at like that?" But the next word that he said, those are the chashuv words. Shlomo shouldn't have pointed his finger. Of course, you have to have their chesed from Rabbi Shera. What Rabbi Shera is in a very high place in Gan Eden. Now, I'm not being sarcastic. In this thing, he was a toya. In this thing, Nebuchadnezzar was a toya. But the point is, he was gewaldig. He was a Kiddush Hashem. We're walking, talking Kiddush Hashem, and they come to gewalt. But in this sach, he was a toya, because we don't have papal infallibility, especially not by askonim, who don't ask. Now, Rabbi Shera said the following words: "You were told already that we made a mistake." Now, I don't know how he knew, but I'm telling you what he said. So we've now established in front of several thousand gentlemen and gentlewomen of the jury that Agudas Yisrael, coming from the top, makes mistakes. Not little mistakes, but big mistakes. Now, in 1984, when Meir Koch, in December of 83, Meir Koch said that he's taking away the money from the Salvation Army because they don't want to write that they will not discriminate in their hiring and go against their evangelical Christian religion and say we will not discriminate and we will hire perverts and deviants. When that happened, not Agudas Yisrael, not Lubavitch, not Satma, not OU, not Young Israel, not RCA, nobody. I took a few people, Jews and Goyim, on January the 1st, New Year's Day, stood at the steps of City Hall with a big photo oak tag that I made with a picture of Meir Koch, and I said that we're giving him the Scrooge Award because he's taking away money from the Salvation Army in the holiday season, which they give to poor people who are homeless, etc., because they don't want to go along with his deviant agenda. So I did this at 11 o'clock on New Year's Day. Meir Koch wakes up, and his press secretary calls him up. I don't think it was Pete Hamill at that time. I think it was before that. It wasn't Hamill. I forget who. It wasn't that other guy either. I forget. But his press secretary, he says, "Mayor, we got a little problem. It's a slow news day. And this rabbi, this rabble-rousing radical rabbi from near Ocean Parkway, who wore a Reagan pin maybe, he is going to make you a lot of bad publicity in the Kratzvach season. You're defunding the Salvation Army that goes around with the Santas and the bells to raise money for poor people." So Koch says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." He talks like a chicken squirrel, like he looked like Purdue from the chickens. See, so we make the press conference, and the media is there because there's nothing going on. So you have WINS, you have Newsday, you have the Daily News, Geschmack. Mayor Koch comes down with one of those woolen hats like the kids wear, the woolen hats that go over the ears. So everybody is nivel mipanov, the mayor of New York, the second biggest, hardest job in the city, in the country. So everybody moves away from him but I didn't move away from him. I moved towards him. And I carry the sign with me. I say, "Oh, Mr. Mayor, how nice. You've come down to accept the Scrooge Award in person. How wonderful." So he says, never mind. And like an Azaz Puddin that he is, he walks over to the microphone bank and he starts to talk. And he starts to be masba why he did what he did, whatever gibberish he said. And then he turns and he walks away. The next day in the Daily News, it says, Army's allies march on Koch. And this was all over the news. So I gave him a kick in the that was that beginning. That was where I ran against him that he writes about in his book. Where was aguda? So listen to this. So the Catholics felt embarrassed and challenged by the Salvation Army evangelicals, so they immediately joined in a friend of the court amicus brief within days. But Agudas Yisrael did not join, not for 1 month, not for 2 months, not for 3 months, not for 4 months. You know who joined from the Jew boys? Yehuda Levin, in the name of the Igud Rabban and the Ring Alliance of America. To the cologne, the shame of Agudas Yisrael, until they were dragged kicking and screaming. And now they have the chutzpah in their rewrite of history, perhaps even in the Rabbi Shera book, to tell you how they wrote an amicus brief. What they didn't tell you is they wrote it months. And if it was even weeks or even days, it was too late. If the Christians and Lahavdil, Yehuda Levin, and the Idra Abanim. So you didn't get into any details. When Zweibel, Rabbi David Zweibel, who I like, and he's fine, and he's the same thing as his Rebbe. He's not better than his Rebbe. He has a blind spot in Nisan Yonim. He has a Messiah. He has a Bizarro. You know what Bizarro is? The crooked Superman. There's a Bizarro Messiah over here. It doesn't come from a Moshe of Yaakov. It doesn't come from Rudim, and it certainly doesn't come from Aaron. It doesn't come from Shach, who said you have to fight it in America. Okay, it's a Bizarro thing. Now, Agudas Yisrael just raised, congratulations, over $5 million in a very short campaign over the internet. One of the beautiful things that they did was they had the day in the life of Klal Yisrael from Agudas Yisrael, and they showed how every few minutes you're living, the buses that your kids have, the meals that your kids eat from the government, the textbooks that they get, the Chaim Aruchim, if they're dying, Chas v'sholom, they're hospicing, it's all Agudas Yisrael, everything. And in the middle of that, they write that Agudas Yisrael is safeguarding that there's no schmutz in the textbooks. By the way, there are schmutzige things in textbooks. Some yeshivas rip them out, some don't. There's various madrigas schmutz, but there are. Second of all, in 2011, this is what happened. The assembly passed a bill that you can and you must and everything else teach all kinds of schmutz in and you can, or whatever it is, a very bad bill in what do you call it? In the private schools, that applies to private schools. And guess what happened? So some people started to raise this. So the assembly passed it unanimously. Now, who is Rabbi Sharon Aguda kiss-up friends with for all the years? Dean Skelos, who they made, Aguda thinly veiled would make yearly or every several years in Lawrence Far Rockaway fundraisers for Dean Skelos, and they would put ads into the paper. We have to show Hakoros HaToiv. So much for the separation of church or synagogue and state officials and money things, okay? But did they go to Skelos and say it's a kal v'chomer? What happened was, after they passed this thing, whatever, the assembly realized they had gone too far. So Simbrowitz, who was run against by a boy named Hayon, a young man, Hayon told him that if you will turn this over, that the yeshiva shouldn't, then I won't run against you anymore. So he got O'Donnell, who is still in the assembly, who's an open, flagrant homosexual, to co-sponsor the bill with him, carving out an exception for the Jewish, for the private schools. Well, it was never brought to a vote in the state senate because Aguda was AWOL. And what about the dirty deal that Aguda cut when gay marriage was coming up? So they cut a deal with the Republicans that allowed the Republicans to vote their conscience if they would put in a religious exemption. So get this. A guy who's an anical Rav Yisrael Salant, who spells his name Saland, said clearly that because of the religious exemption, he and a few others followed him, voted, and that's why we have gay marriage in New York, which was a major reason. As New York, the Empire State Building goes, so goes the Supreme Court. And it's a dunk that aguda Yisrael cut a deal. Now, if somebody's coming with a gun to shoot your mother, al titesh tarisi mecha, you don't say, oh, if you're going to give my mother medication after you shoot her, we'll allow you to shoot my mother. We don't do that asininity. So when he writes these holier than thou things to you, Rabbi Yaakov Homnik, and there's more where that came from, you don't begin to know the perfidy, the incestuous. How about when Reb Moshe Shera is David Schick?
We have 8 minutes. I want to say a few things about my father.
Okay, good. I'm this last sentence and you can go. How about when Rabbi Shera is David Schick, after Cuomo was running for re-election, when he had already made his gay executive order and done so much damage, after his Notre Dame speech, being matter, abortion, etc., after that he is David Schick to make a fundraiser. This idea that there's not an incestuous relationship between aguda and the politicians, you could sell this to the Brooklyn Bridge people. Go ahead with your Torah, please, and your father.
Yeah, so we only have a few minutes. Yes,
please.
Say a few,
100%. And I apologize. I apologize for being long-winded. We'll have you on the third time if necessary. Go ahead.
So this is an interesting story that my father did. People knew my father. He was a very original type of person, and he had his own style. But he wouldn't have written the article that I wrote. He was a very loyal in communal institutions. He would be mavatal his das to communal institutions. So a very, very interesting man. So I'll just tell you a little bit quickly. Amazing story that happened with my father. Talk about aguda Yisrael, but it happened in a funny way. My father, maybe about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, no, actually, maybe only about 8 years ago, the last time they finished the Shas. So what happened was my father, I was living in Florida, my sister was living in California, and Delta Airlines made a sale that if you buy a ticket from New York to Florida and New York to California in the same year, they'll give you a free international ticket. So my father went to visit my sister in California, went to visit me in Florida, and now he had a free international ticket to any destination where he could fly. He's trying to think where is he supposed to go. Where's David still wants to go? He's convinced that it must be something he's going to accomplish internationally somewhere. But where could he go? So he had a client. He was a psychologist, and he worked with somebody. He also worked with what's out there. There was a bucker from Argentina who used to always say to him, "They would love you in Argentina." I don't know what the basis of it was or if it made any sense, but that's what he used to say. If you went to Argentina, they would love you. All right. My father said, so he called the good Israel, and he says, "Listen, I have a free ticket to Argentina. Maybe you can set me up some speaking engagements over there, or help me with a place to stay, this and that." So they probably thought, that it's a little bit of an eccentric request, and they didn't say no, but he was calling, and it wasn't happening. Yeah, they would tell him, "I'm looking into it, I'll get back to you," this and that. Anyway, finally he decided, you know what, he made a chesed, he picked a date that worked for him, and he asked this Lubavitcher guy, someone who knew this Chabad rabbi in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. The guy agreed to house him, pick him up at the airport. And so he's going. Now, he has no idea where he's going to speak, what he's going to speak, what he's going to say, he just had an impulse. And he had tickets. So he goes to the airport. Again, he picks a day randomly, just with convenience for him. He gets on the plane. Who's there? The small Kamenetsky, along with a representative of Aguda he couldn't get him, to make a serious arrangement with him. That guy is on the plane with Shmuel Kamenetsky. What's going on? Because they were making the CMS shots, in the CMS shots that year came out during the season when all the Argentinians go to the mountains. So they made the CMS shots like a month later than everyone else. And Shmuel wanted to speak. But since Shmuel was going to speak, and my father was sitting next to him on the plane, Shmuel was in the hallway, so when they got off, the Oilam thought that a good Yisrael sent two good Oilam. They sent Shmuel Kamenetsky, and they sent my father.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful.
And so what happened was, so they put him up on the dais by the CMS shot. Once he was there, and then Shmuel left the next morning, but once he was there, they said, well, wow, one of the Gedolim from a good Yisrael is staying extra days. So they all invited him to speak. He spoke in 16 different moisters.
Wow.
In boys' schools, girls' schools, different ages, kollel, shuls. They were shuttling back and forth. And some places he spoke in Yiddish, some places in English, depending on what they knew and understood. Sometimes they had a translator. There's a Noivayim Dikamaisa Dismaya that he ended up having a big hashpah on this island in Argentina. Because he went on be talking to the airport like that.
I want to say something else. Your father was, what was it, a psychologist?
Yeah.
Okay, and he made tremendous shalom bayis. Could you tell me the Maisa with tell the oil and the Maisa with that's Aaron Akoyan. Tell the Maisa with the lawyer that you told me.
Yeah, so very, very quickly, there was a lawyer in New York law. Before you could petition for divorce, you had to show that you went to 3 sessions with a marriage counsel, made a hashtabus. So this lawyer said to my father, listen, I can throw you some business. I refer you a couple. You get 3 sessions worth of money, and we're good. So they referred him a couple, 3 sessions, and they stayed for many sessions, and they stayed married. Then the lawyer sent him another couple. Same thing happened. Then he sent him a 3rd couple, and the same thing happened. After that, he never sent him anymore. So my father said, "You look at that. The parnasa, the guy, he doesn't have the integrity to send me anymore because I'm curing his patients." But finally, he met the guy after a couple of years. He met the guy after a couple of years. He said to me, "How come you're not sending me anymore?" He says, "It can't be that all these people are supposed to stay married. What, 3 out of 3, 100%? The first 2, I figured it could happen. 3 out of 3. It's something crazy you're doing there. I don't know what you're doing. Hypnosis doesn't make sense. I couldn't send you anymore." Time is up.
Thank you. Have a good Tamid. We'll be back next week with more of the same. Spread the word. A good Shabbos. Rebbe, I have to apologize. I got carried away, and I really didn't give you enough time. No. And I apologize. I apologize. Look. I was giving schayra. I really was, but
No. Listen to me. Listen. You don't have to. I anticipate all the shock with that, but Lamaisa, and I'm aware some people are going to call me and say to me, it's really a shame you were trying to, not get too severe and trying to make peace, and then Levin is going off. But the truth is,